I'm so excited to have brought back this anti-aging regenerative medicine course, so hopefully you guys will be as excited as I am. And one of my passions, and I think we really miss out on this when we are in medical school, is the talk about nutrition and how important it is to our overall health. Every skin disease, as well as every other disease, is related to what we put inside our body. And so the lovely Dr. Patricia Ferris is going to teach us all about the role of nutrition and diet in our health care for our skin. Thanks.
I have to commend whoever put together this program. There's at least 3 or 4 nutrition talks, so that's, to me, is really very exciting. So, of course, health-conscious consumers are everywhere now, and they're looking more towards healthy lifestyle and changes they can make to not only extend their life, but also extend their health. And they're looking to exercise. They're looking at nutritional foods and beverages. Supplements are really big. I spoke about those on Thursday. We have a couple more talks today on nutraceuticals. And then, of course, even personal care products. And this is really growing this whole industry. We also know that good nutrition not only extends lifespan, but it improves our health span as well. And so I think a lot of us, and Glynis alluded to this, get into a little bit of a quandary when patients start asking us questions about nutrition. Those of you who trained more recently are probably more well-informed than we were back in the day. But most of what we've learned about nutrition, we've learned along the way and sort of by pulling up our own bootstraps and educating ourselves. But patients do want to know how their nutritional status affects their health. And a lot of what we know about nutrition and health really comes from the study of the blue zones. And I've always been very interested in these areas. This includes Okinawa, Japan, Ikaria, Greece, Sardinia in Italy. There's some small town in Costa Rica, the name of which I can never remember, so I apologize. I think it's Nicoya, Costa Rica, and then in Loma Linda, California. And these are the places where people live longer, so we have more octogenarians, even centenarians in places like this. But they also have healthier lifespans. They have less cancer, they have less diabetes. So let's take a look, and these are the recommendations from studying the blue zones. So what do these people eat? Well, they eat lots of seasonal fruits and vegetables. So in many of these places, they're growing fruits and veggies, and they have only whole grains. They have bread that's either whole grain or sourdough. They have a recommendation of a half a cup to 1 cup of cooked beans a day, which is a great source, of course, of protein. They have a little slogan that I really like: retreat from meat and try tofu instead. They only recommend fish 3 times a week, even though we think of these areas as being primarily fish. Their fishing community, certainly in Greece and in Italy, the population actually doesn't eat fish all that often, so 3 times weekly. They've also minimized the consumption of eggs to 3 eggs per week. That would be really hard for me because I love eggs. They recommend only plant-based oils / sugar. I think we're all are well aware of this now, to less than 28 grams of added sugars daily. And then snacking on nuts and drinking only water and tea. So this would be the ideal diet. And they also recommend a 95% plant-based diet. And I think we see lots of our internists preaching to us, I know mine always does, really moving towards more plant-based diets. And again, it's easier said than done. Now, this, unfortunately, is what your average American's diet looks like, and this is not good. This is the Western diet. It's very high in calories. The glycemic load is through the roof. We have heavy dairy and meat consumption, and we have very high saturated fats. And the problem with this is that it upregulates what's called mTOR signaling. mTOR is a nutrient-sensitive kinase that responds to a variety of environmental signals. Nutrition is just one of them. It's involved in many things regarding the skin, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But interesting studies have demonstrated that if we can inhibit this pathway, if we can stop hyperactivity of mTOR, we can extend both the lifespan and the health span of a variety of organisms. It's been looked at in yeast, in worms, and in mice. mTOR, by the way, stands for the mammalian target of rapamycin, so it's a target of sirolimus. So we can obviously downregulate it by rapamycin or the medication metformin, but the most easy way to do it is with caloric restriction, but you have to restrict your daily calories 20%. And again, that is a very tall task. So as an alternative to caloric restriction, we can actually manipulate the diet, and we'll call it dietary restriction, reducing the things that turn on mTOR, like sugar and dairy and meat. And we increase the consumption of fruits and vegetables. And this is a list of natural mTOR inhibitors. And these are all of those wonderful antioxidants, the polyphenols, resveratrol, genistein, quercetin, EGCG, which is in green tea, all of those nice polyphenolic antioxidants that we have in our fruits and vegetables. So these are natural mTOR inhibitors. Now, if we look at mTOR, and like I said, it's the high glycemic load, it's the leucine in meat, and it's the proteins in milk that cause overexpression of this pathway. It's associated with a variety of dermatologic problems. mTOR overexpression increases mast cell proliferation, T cell activation, and reduces filaggrin. So this is the association with atopic dermatitis. It also increases cell proliferation, but it causes a dysregulated differentiation. So again, this is where we can link it to flares of psoriasis. It also increases Th17 cell differentiation and macrophage release of a variety of cytokines. So this could impact hidradenitis. It regulates basal layer apoptosis and acantholysis. So this is how it could impact the conditions like pemphigus. And then finally, it increases insulin-like growth factor, androgens, increases sebum production, and also causes acroinfundibular hyperproliferation. So obviously, these are all of the pathogenic mechanisms that we see in acne. And this is why we now, at least in one dermatologic condition, I would say acne, we actually can connect the dots between nutrition and the disease. We tell our patients routinely to lower their glycemic load. I tell all the kids in my office, no more junk food, stop eating sugars, no more sugary drinks. I'm sure they laugh at me and walk out the door and drink a Coke, but I do tell them these things. I tell them not to restrict their total dairy protein and to minimize skim milk consumption, no whey protein abuse. We see a lot of the young boys drinking whey protein shakes when they're trying to work out. And then increasing plant-based foods. Again, trying to increase those natural mTOR inhibitors. Increasing the consumption of fish is good because these are the omega-3s, the anti-inflammatories. And then increasing the intake of vitamin D because vitamin D has been shown to be able to downregulate sebum production. So lots of good information here. This is a great article by Zaboulis, who's done a lot of studies in nutrition. Now, the other thing, and you're going to have a whole lecture on this, so I won't belabor it, but the other thing that lousy diet that we eat does is it causes gut dysbiosis. Too many processed foods, too much sugar, too many saturated fats, low fiber, and low in whole grains. Alcohol abuse also messes with your microbiome. Psychological stress, we're all well familiar with the gut-brain axis, gut-brain-skin axis, and then the overuse of antibiotics, which I think as dermatologists we're sometimes guilty of. So I think we're way more cognizant of that now than we used to be. But this comes into play with lots of skin conditions, and I know Dr. Day is going to cover this, so again, I won't belabor it. Now, one of the questions I think would be fun, or at least interesting to be able to answer for our aesthetic patients is, if I eat better, will I look better? And there are some studies that have looked at this. They're mostly retrospective studies. Now, we know that we now talk about something called the exposome. These are all the environmental influences that occur on the skin throughout somebody's lifetime. And there are external exposomal factors like pollution and obviously ultraviolet light and even tobacco smoke. But there are also internal exposomal factors like lack of sleep and stress, and poor nutrition is one of these. So we know that it does in some way impact skin aging. And a lot of what we know about beauty from within, we actually learn from the Asian cultures. And this is very well accepted in Asia, and no surprise that Asia actually has the highest sales of any place in the world of nutri-cosmetics because they're very conscious of the inside-out approach. And I was actually in Japan a few years ago with one of my children, and I was shocked to find this in a pharmacy in the building that we were staying in. They actually had an entire section of beauty foods, and women were buzzing through there and grabbing different things, and they had collagen content on. I mean, it's quite well accepted in Asian culture, and good for them. They're obviously ahead of us in some ways. So the question is, what did the study show? This was a very interesting study. It was called the NHANES study, the National Health and Nutritional Examination Survey study. There were 4,025 women in this study, and they assessed nutrients by 24-hour recall. Dermatologists evaluated the patients for wrinkling, for dryness, and for atrophy. And what they found was that those who had a higher intake of vitamin C had less wrinkling and less dryness. No surprise there. We know vitamin C is important in collagen production. Higher intakes of linoleic acid had less dryness and less atrophy. That's one of the omega-6s. High fat, high carbohydrate intake associated with more wrinkling and more skin atrophy. So none of this should be a surprise based on what we just talked about. More recently, this study came out. This is called the Rotterdam study, and this was published in the JAD, in the Blue Journal, in 2019. They looked at 2,700 patients. These were Dutch patients. They assessed their diet by what's called the FFQ, the Food Frequency Questionnaire. And in this particular study, they weren't looking for individual foods. They were looking more at dietary patterns. They compared these dietary patterns with the Dutch Health Diet Index, and they looked at the wrinkles and quantified them digitally. And then they also looked at some other healthy lifestyles. And when they looked at it, they found that women who had a better adherence to a healthy pattern, meaning more vegetables, more fish, more nuts, more seeds, more mineral water, and wine, so there's a little silver lining, you can drink wine, that was associated with less wrinkling in the women, but it did not play out in men. And on the flip side, the ones who had the unhealthy pattern, the meats, the grains, the snacks, the soft drinks, and all kinds of alcoholic beverages, had more wrinkles as opposed to the women who stuck to the healthier pattern. So this is just a very interesting study. And then there was, of course, we know that glycation plays a major role, and all of this connection between high sugar diets and high glycemic index diets is because we know that that sugar can cause glycation, advanced glycation end products form, and these are cross-linked collagen and elastin molecules, and once they get cross-linked, they lose their viscoelastic properties, so we kind of call this the sugar sag, and this has been well reported in the literature. This was another interesting study looking at the appearance of photoage skin and nutrition. And this was a multinational study, and what they did was they evaluated again using that FFQ, the Food Frequency Questionnaire, and they looked at skin wrinkling in sun-damaged skin. And what they demonstrated was that if you ate more vegetables, olive oil, fish, and vegetables, you had less wrinkling. Again, no surprise. And that if you ate less of the butter, the meat, the dairy, and the sugar, you also had less wrinkling. So again, this is a nice study just demonstrating some overall dietary recommendations that we can make for our patients. Now, systemic photoprotection has been talked about a lot, and although all of the substances I have listed here, lycopene, high flavanol chocolate, as well as vitamin C and E supplements, do confer some degree of photoprotection. Unfortunately, we have not replaced sunscreen yet. So these give you just a small change in your MED, and I always tell patients this is not the direction to go. Chemo prevention is another step further, obviously, than photoprotection. The question being, can we really prevent skin cancer with phytochemicals? And phytochemicals do block both the initiation phase as well as the promotion and the progression phase. In the initiation phase, we know that things like polyphenols actually do absorb ultraviolet light. They absorb in the UVB spectrum. Carotenoids absorb in the little longer spectrum, in the long UVA wavelengths, as well as visible light. And we also know that, of course, they quench free radicals. They also can upregulate your own endogenous antioxidants. So there's lots of ways that these nutritional phytonutrients can actually help us to protect from skin cancer. In addition, lots of animal studies have looked at this, and they have demonstrated that all of the substances here can actually protect animals who are exposed to ultraviolet light, solar simulated light, from getting skin cancer. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of studies in humans, so this really hasn't played out all that well in human trials, and studies have failed to confirm the benefits of things like retinol, beta-carotene, and vitamin E. So we need a lot more studies on this, but wouldn't it be great if we could in some way connect the dots here again between nutrition and skin cancer? Now, one thing that I think most of us are using in our practices is nicotinamide, and this study was published in in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2015, and they took patients at risk for skin cancer who had had 2 or more non-melanoma skin cancers in the last 5 years and put them on 500 milligrams twice a day of nicotinamide, a very simple nutritional intervention. And there was a 23% relative rate in the reduction of new non-melanoma skin cancer seen as early as 3 months. Unfortunately, the benefits are lost as soon as you go off it, so if you put patients on this who are really getting lots of basal cells and squamous squamous cells, they've got to stay on it. It's believed that because this is a precursor to NAD, it's actually fueling the energy source that we need to repair the DNA damage caused by ultraviolet light. So a great nutritional intervention. And then just finally, we also know that nutrition may actually impact our treatment of skin cancers. And we know that we're using checkpoint inhibitors to treat aggressive squamous cells, and certainly they've been used extensively in treating melanoma. This study actually came out of MD Anderson, and what they demonstrated was by looking at the dietary history of patients who were starting checkpoint inhibitors, they found out that those that had the greatest, they looked at their microbiome, and those that had the greatest bacterial diversity actually had the highest response rate. The higher the diversity, bacterial diversity, the better, more likely they were to respond. So antibiotic use, which would lower your diversity, even probiotics, again, lowers your diversity. These were associated with more poor response. So these are the kind of things, again, where we're starting to connect the dots between the gut microbiome and the skin. So I think while we don't know all the answers, we could certainly tell our patients that they should eat this and not eat that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ferris. You know, the money isn't made by doing the research on the diet and nutrition and things like that. That's the problem. A lot of companies have a lot of money, but when it comes to telling your patients, eat this, avoid this, it's a lot harder since Coca-Cola has a lot of money out there. So our next speaker is Dr. Doris Day, and she's going to talk to us more about this gut-brain-skin axis, and let's hear it.
Well, this is an area I am fascinated with, and I think it's a little bit overwhelming, and also we're in the infancy of what we know about this. So everything I'm telling you today is with the understanding that we still know essentially nothing. And I think that is not a bad thing, because in the end, when we start here, understanding by looking forward and looking back and looking at all elements of the body, things that we've known intuitively to be true, we're now being able to prove. So in the past, when we would say stress and acne, we'd say, you know what, or chocolate and acne, or anything that we saw cause the flare, our answer was, well, if you thought that had an impact, then stop doing that, right? And we don't have data to show it. But now we're starting to see that these patterns and these trends we're seeing are true, and there are ways that we can look at it. And not only will it make us better when we're younger, but what makes you better when you're younger, besides annihilating every organism that lives on your skin and in your gut with all the antibiotics that we've given, but by nurturing them and respecting that they actually have a role in our body, when you do that as a teenager, you're better at 60. That when you worry about those senescent cells that are forming when you're young, you actually age better, because they're not around creating inflammation into your 30s and 40s when you stop making collagen, and you'll age better. So the first thing to understand is that all of us here are not us. We are covered in microorganisms, and one-to-one of our cells to microorganisms are equal. But if you look at genetics, it's 1,000-fold more. They have more genetics. So your genetics between invaders into our DNA, and think of the mitochondria as the first, right? Those little organelles, my favorite organelles that keep us going, the powerhouses of our cells and our bodies, were at one time not us. They even still have some of their own DNA. So once we accept that we're mostly not us, and we have to live with the microorganisms that are in and around us, and that they have positive, powerful impacts on us, then we can get to that next level of saying, how do we nurture them and curate them to have them help us age better, look better, feel better? And we're even learning about all sorts of things that we'll get to in the talk. So in a way, we've known this for a long time. Hippocrates said all diseases begin in the gut, and we know that millions of Americans are affected by things like acne, atopic dermatitis, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, and 250 million people worldwide suffer from depression, and now we're learning that Parkinson's has a role in this as well. So it's going way beyond what we see in the skin, but we're learning that there's connections with so many disorders, and I think that we're going to find that pretty much everything is affected by this gut-brain-skin axis. So the skin microbiome is for me, very fascinating. I just wrote a book with Dr. Thomas Hitchcock called Rebooting the Biome. It should be out in a few weeks on Amazon, plug for my book. But he's brilliant, and he came up with Zycrobe technology, which is now owned by Crown, and I have nothing to do with that. But what we did in studying the skin microbiome is understanding how we've been getting it totally wrong for so long, and we don't want to annihilate anything. We want to curate and improve. So when you learn about the skin, it's about 2 meters if you just lay it out. But if you go through all the follicles and you spread all of that out, it's 28 meters. So it's a massive piece of real estate. And the microbes that live in and around there, not only if you look at C. acnes for one, C. acnes, we blame bacteria on C. acnes, but what we've learned is that there's strains of C. acnes. And when you have a strain that is more pro-inflammatory, it can actually throw off other strains of bacteria that live in the skin, and that can cause that dysbiosis that creates the inflammation and the problems we see. And when you repair that by providing the better bacteria that should live in the skin, C. acnes defendans is a much better strain, you can actually not just restore your skin from acne, but you can restore hydration and restore the barrier. So these microbes, because what they do is, one is they populate in the right way, but on the other hand, what they do also is their byproducts, their breakdown products, like propionic acid, short-chain fatty acids, all of those things act as retinoids and vitamin C and repair mechanisms that Patty was talking about that help the skin help itself. So our skin has the capabilities to do a lot of things for itself, and our body does too, if only we take care of it in the right way. So this is a multifactorial ecosystem, and we have to look at all of these different factors that affect it, and that's why it's the gut-brain-skin axis. So when you look at the gut axis and the GI system, that anti-inflammatory environment, the gut really wants to create repair, and it's more in the small intestine than the large intestine. So when systemic inflammation starts there, I had Haynes Ely, who sadly passed from metastatic prostate cancer, on my radio show. And he wrote an article called Is Psoriasis a Bowel Disease? And what he showed was that if you look at patients with psoriasis and you look at their diet and you cut out alcohol and you give them 2 supplements, Duozyme and quercetin, with each meal, he said he could cure psoriasis. Cure. Had patients off biologics. I was like, cure is a big word. And he said, have them do it for 3 months, see what happens. So I started to follow his protocols, and I've had patients completely off all biologics and essentially cured of their psoriasis. Not every patient, and not every patient's willing to do it. They had to stop alcohol, and they had to stop spicy foods, nothing hot on the tongue. And his theory was that there were bacterial cell wall endotoxins and bacterial cell wall byproducts that leak through the gut, that cause that leaky gut in that environment, and they land in the joints, they land in the skin, and in people who are prone to it, they ended up with inflammation that if they had the genetics for psoriasis, they ended up with psoriasis. And I had a woman who I tried biologics on. She absolutely had psoriasis. Some worked for a while, some didn't. We had to rotate through them. And I said, you know what, she was ready to give up. And it was affecting her marriage, and I said, let's just try this. And she was so desperate, she tried it. And to this day, she's still clear. But the other thing about it is that her bonus was she felt better. She looked better, she aged better, and she was happier. And I think all of those connections are really, really important. So this is not going to be true for every single patient, nor is every patient willing to make this effort to eat the right way, right? We're all so tempted by the fast food restaurants and all the sugar and the desserts and the treats and the sweets. So not everyone is capable or willing of following the proper diet and doing the right things, but understanding that these connections are real and that there are articles published to this makes a big difference. So patients with acne have a distinct gut microbiota in comparison with healthy controls. And it's also related to atopic dermatitis. And of course, stress has a relation to this. And if you look at the work that Nutrafol has done in this regard, in looking at the effects of stress on your immune system and how that affects hair growth, they've done some very solid work, and of course they have a bottom line attached to it, but the work that's done is quite solid. So this is from Haynes Ely's work about psoriasis bowel disease, and he looked at the specific bacteria. He thought it was E. coli, and he thought bile acids at 20 times normal levels, that's duozyme, and he has the dosing, I think it's 120 milligrams. And then the quercetin, which are the bioflavonoids, and from Patty's talk, it makes perfect sense. And he shows picture after picture of his patients doing really well. And to his credit, after the radio show, so many people emailed him, he answered every single one. So they noticed that there were significant reductions in their bile acid levels in their bile, and it broke up the endotoxin cell wall products in the gut. That was his theory behind it. And so those dietary changes to reduce the endotoxin absorption, avoiding the alcohol, as I mentioned, and the hot spices and carbonated drinks, and then quercetin inhibits endotoxin absorption. And actually, quercetin helps against viruses as well. You'll see a lot of this has overlap. So there is a symbiotic relationship, or in some cases, a dysbiotic relationship between the gut and the skin. And if you look at the synthesizing bacteria, you can see the molecule associated with them and then the effects on the skin. So I won't go through this because you have all these slides that get emailed to you, but I wanted you to have this. It's a busy slide, but it's something to look at later to see what these ingredients are, the bacteria that make them, what molecule they're associated with, and their potential documented effects on the skin, because those are things that we can start curating and looking at with our patients to help them, as we also do what we know works, whether it's using JAK inhibitors or oral or topical, or even topical steroids as we need, but it's guiding them to this next level of care. So Cutibacterium and the skin-specific bacterial species. So we know that Cutibacteria is one of the most abundant microbes on human skin, and it counts for about 89% of bacteria in our sebaceous follicles, and there's now good strains versus bad strains, as I was mentioning. So this was some of the work that Dr. Thomas Hitchcock did. So you look at what, if you look at the reduced, it's not so much reduced sebum production, but if you have the right Cutibacteria species, it eats the sebum, and that sebum is there producing food for those bacteria, and the breakdown products are actually good for your skin. So not only are your pores better, skin is smoother, but you've also added regenerative properties and better hydration for the skin with essentially one ingredient that's live microbes. So you want to be careful about how much you use preservatives or ingredients that are toxic, like the benzoyl peroxides. Salicylic acid is actually friendly to the skin microbiome, so that's one ingredient that I like using along with my acne treatment regimens, and it gets down into the follicle and does help with that exfoliation process. It also helps reduce erythema because it's reducing inflammation. So over time, you'll see that there's an improvement in erythema as well. So when you look at the fermented skincare, there's both the prebiotic, that's the support for the actual bacteria. The probiotic is the live microorganisms, and the postbiotic is the breakdown products of those bacteria that are actually as beneficial. So their waste is still our treasure. So with the gut microbiome, there's about 100 trillion microbes in the gut. That's more than 10 times the number of cells in the human body. So again, we're more not us than us. And these affect all the organs in our system, and when those are off, it can cause everything from fatty liver or liver disease, cancers, inflammation, Parkinson's. We're finding that pretty much it's what Hippocrates said is true, everything starts in the gut. And unfortunately, with Western diets, when everything is fast food produced and everything is modified more for appearance and volume as opposed to nutrition, we're ending up with environmental exposures as well between pollution and the chemicals we're breathing, even from the flame retardant, carpets and furniture, not that everyone should run out of the room or anything, but all of that is affecting our skin flora and our gut environment as well. So these are things that I think in the future we're going to pay more attention to. Now, when you think about the gut and the brain, we know that it affects hormone release that can also affect the gut microbes. And cortisol seems to be one of the most important elements that are produced, but there's so much we can do to moderate that. And a lot of it, again, comes down to choosing the right foods. So we want to manage our stress because that affects our gut. And that's why people, I mean, it's so interesting. If you think about every other language, so many of the words for energy come from the gut, are related to that. So there's lots of supplements that you can take that can help reduce that. And what I see with that is that this can moderate their energy level. So the time that you eat and the order in which you eat food can have a big impact on your gut microbes and also on the effect that they have. And a lot of this goes to your glycemic index as well. When you think about the gut and the brain and the skin, think of the skin as like your diffuse brain, because so many of the neuropeptides that are released from the brain impact your skin, and that can impact your entire body. So not only does it go from internal to the skin and show in your skin, but your skin actually sends signals internally that can affect how you age, can affect even things like depression and Parkinson's. So when we talk about someone and we say that they look good or they look well rested, we're really not just talking about their skin. It goes way beyond that, and we can actually see their health by looking at them. And those connections are not just our perception of them, but it's actually oftentimes a reflection of their true overall health and well-being. So we're learning that there's a negative correlation between certain types of bacteria and depressive symptoms. And a lot of these have impact on the skin. And this is true in things like Parkinson's, and we're seeing so many connections. It's almost overwhelming to see how many connections we're finding and how the science is now, I think, exponentially going to catch up with what they know, what we see intuitively. So a lot of what we see in the brain-skin axis is the nervous breakdown of the skin. So this is what I was talking about the neuropeptides that are affected by the skin that actually send signals internally that can affect mood, that can affect the gut, and that can affect your overall health and well-being. So taking care of our skin is really not vanity, and it's not just superficial. So I'm out of time, so I'll go on. That it goes both ways. We talk about hair loss. Follicles play a huge role in this. So it's important to manage it holistically, and I think that's where we're ending up, is looking at what you put in your body, the foods you eat, supplements you take. I believe in all of it. And then, of course, as we age, it's also about proper hormone correction. And the supplements I think are important are things like N-acetylcysteine, quercetin, coenzyme Q10, resveratrol, even maybe a little rapamycin now and then, which Patty was talking about, mTOR. I think all that's important. And then the power of the mind just through meditation, I think, is really important as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and hopefully you guys are learning more and more every minute. I've already written down notes, and I think it's really important. This is sponsored by Coca-Cola and Doritos, so we are all set to go. Okay, next talk is actually me. I think we want to just reset that timer. It's a little off. Okay, thank you. My talk should come up, hopefully, soon. Okay, oop, go back. Okay, so nutraceuticals. You've heard some information out there. I do think you always make, lead up to your name and make up for your name, and obviously standard American diet is the SAD diet. So it is something that I really try to talk to patients about. Every one of my patients, I think this is a discussion. If you aren't having it, hopefully when you go back and start seeing your patients again, it will be something that you implement in your practice, because I really do think it's important. Again, nutraceuticals, I mentioned yesterday, I grew up on supplements in my life. My grandfather was a vegetarian and pushed, actually a pescatarian, sorry, and pushed supplements and nutrition and all that good stuff with my mom, and so she pushed it on to us. And I have my kids on supplements, so it's a really big deal. These are my disclosures. I do a lot of research in hair, so I do research grants for these companies. And again, you've heard this comment, and it's going to be, we're going to over and over and over into your head until you really get it. But we know that we know, first of all, we know malnutrition absolutely affects our body. It affects our skin, it affects our hair, it affects our nails. That is well known and well documented. We are realizing, I think, more and more that these Western or standard American diets are not what are going to be the way that we will live our best life. And so we really have to keep that in mind. Even if there isn't a lot of research behind that standard American diet, we are seeing more data on Mediterranean diets and eating healthy and the things that Dr. Ferris had mentioned in her talk, as well as Dr. Day. So the question becomes, are there supplements that we can then add to our lifestyle? I have handouts. I'm a big handout girl, so I have handouts. One of the handouts that I give is this handout. I've made it for my patients. It talks about nutrition and hair health. I do believe that this, for me, is number one. I love nutrition. I love supplements. I love all these things, but it starts with what we put in our bodies, what we put in our kids' bodies, what we recommend to our patients, our family members. And so I go over what I call the top 6 things that I like my patients to do if they possibly can in order to improve their hair health. And again, this can go across the board, but this is specifically for hair. The first one are fatty fish, and that includes the things like tuna, mackerel. The only one I like on that list is salmon, so I eat a lot of salmon. Patty mentioned that there are certain recommendations of not eating it too much. The idea is that you actually can't absorb that much protein, so the ideal amount is actually only 2 ounces at a time in a sitting, and that is how you're supposed to eat it, so you actually get all the nutrition from that. So fatty fish, I do like eggs. I know that she'd also mentioned only 3 a week. I don't think I could manage on 3 a week. I eat a lot of eggs. The problem, of course, is eggs can be inflammatory, so that is something to keep in mind. If you have something inflammatory, that may be something you want to cut back on. But again, when it comes to hair health, and all this is on here, and I believe that you get copies of all this. If not, you can certainly email me. I'll be happy to send a copy of this. And then leafy greens, really big deal. You've already heard about it, but I do kale, spinach, and collard greens. I do love it, and I try to put that with every meal, and I think it's really important. Nuts are another big one. The ones I try to do are the Brazil nuts, which I hate, but I eat 2 a day, every single day. I have it in my office in a jar, and I eat it every day. Walnuts are another big one, and then almonds. Those are, I think, the 3 main ones when you're dealing with hair health. Seeds are another big one. You can add them to smoothies. I like putting on the top of salads. So again, I throw these in. Chia, pumpkin, and flax, to me, are the most important 3, and I add them to as many meals as I possibly can. And finally, fruit. It is a little bit more sugar-based, and so I tend to do less fruit. I tend to do less sweet fruit. So that's how I add it to my diet, and I will do smoothies with less sweet fruits, lingonberries, things like that. But you can do the berries, cherries, and oranges. And again, and I do a lot of virgin coconut oil. I actually do a teaspoon or a tablespoon a day of that. I will actually eat that just by itself. So what is a supplement? We're again adding things in the perfect world. We don't need them. In the perfect world, you eat everything you need just the way you need it. You get everything you want or need in your body, and you don't have to do a supplement. The problem is that we are not getting that. Most of the foods that we eat have some kind of modification. Many things are made in the lab. Not everyone is eating off a farm. I actually order food from a place in Pennsylvania. It is an Amish farm, and they actually do a lot of all the dairy that I get is from them. So there are ways to get more land-based products if you want. But the idea, again, is that we are not always getting all the amino acids, the vitamins, and enzymes that we need to be having this perfect diet and having the perfect skin, hair, nails, whatever it is that you want in your situation. So I use this as an adjunct to a healthy nutrition. The healthier you eat, maybe the less you need. The less healthy you eat, probably the more you need in these situations. I do have my patients get their baseline labs, and you can get these micronutrient lab testing that are done. They'll actually come to people's houses. It's called Vibrant, I think it's Vibrant something. Anyways, they will come to your house, they will draw your blood, you can order a micronutrient panel, and you can find out exactly what you are deficient in. One of my staff members is low in magnesium. She's been having leg cramps. The blood work told us that, and she could add in magnesium to her diet. I recommended magnesium in her baths, but again, different options there. So remember that it's different. So the Dietary Supplement and Health Education Act of 1994, that's what regulates all of these new supplements that are on the market and the products that are out there. It is different than the FDA. So there's not a lot of control. I like the idea of having products that have been tested, products that have studies behind them and data behind them that show that they actually work. There are 62, as of a few months ago, 62 hair loss supplements on the market, but most of them are lacking data, and that is the problem. So I've just listed a few here, and I think the most important thing, again, is the ones that do show the information that you want. The first one I'm going to mention is a nutraceutical. Again, we talked about this multi-targeted approach. You heard Doris say this. We know that the loss of hair is a multifactorial etiology. So we need to approach it in the same way. We need to look at what are the things in our lives that we can look at and we can attack. Stress is a big one. We know that with COVID, how many people were stressed, how many people were sitting at home, how many people were overeating, how many people weren't working out like they used to. So many things went along with that. But stress doesn't just go away. Even though theoretically people now say COVID is gone, how many people are still stressed in their lives? Anyone? There's a few hands. Okay, hopefully less and less. I meditate. I know Doris mentioned this. I meditate twice a day. I think it's really important. Anything you can do for yourself. So stress is a big aspect. Hormones are a big aspect. I'm going through menopause right now, so it's something I'm dealing with, and I do discuss that with my patients. I think it's something that you have to have a discussion about and decide how you're going to approach that. Free radicals, all the stuff that's out there, whether it's the chemicals you use to treat our hair. I saw an article that talked about how we should really only chemically treat our hair 3 times a year. And I said, well, that's probably not going to happen for me. I don't know how many people want to do that. Look good 3 times a year, but that works for some individuals. And then again, the pollution, cars, all the cars that are out there. I always talk about how I wish when COVID hit, and we had the skies open up and the skies were blue and you didn't see the smog and the dolphins were in the sea of, around Venice, how people didn't wake up and say, okay, this is what we need to really promote. And now it's all back to the smog and all that stuff. But we do have a chance of doing something with climate control. Inflammation, oxidative stress, of course, whether it's exposure to the UV light and things like that, but of course, what other things that you're putting into your body, diet, nutrition, all that. Circulation, nutrition, what you can put in your body. So multi-targeted approach. This was the Synergen Complex Plus that we did the study on. This was for menopausal, perimenopausal, and postmenopausal women. And they took basically this nutraceutical, they took the Synergen Complex, which contained the basics, which were, again, the saw palmetto, the antioxidants, and the curcumin, and they then mixed it in with adding maca, which is a really nice, and I was taking maca by itself because it helps me sleep, and it's something that can also work, again, as a bio-optimized version. It's got the phytoestrogens in it, so you're going to get that DHT blocking action, but a lot of other great benefits as well, especially with menopause. The astaxanthin, which is, again, from the red algae, which is a very, very potent antioxidant, higher than anything you can get. And then they added even more saw palmetto. And so our patients in the study, I'll just show you some of the data. This was a study, we did a year study. We did the first 6 months. It was a double-blind placebo-controlled study. We had the patients on it. We had the placebo as well as the active, and patients did well. We saw an increase, again, in statistically improvement in the terminal hairs, vellus hairs, and total hair counts, as well as a decrease in shedding across the board. Then what we did is we actually took those patients, all of them went into the last 6 months of the trial. Everyone went on active, and we saw, again, an increase, and these are just some of the data here. Mean terminal hair increase for everybody, increase in hair counts, basically decrease in hair shedding to 43% decrease, which is pretty high, then global improvement in hair ratings, as well as increase in texture and all that. So patients did really well on these nutraceuticals. Again, this was a study specifically for women going through menopause, and patients felt better. So it shows you that, again, if you can address different issues, different problems that go along with menopause, that you would feel better. The hair looked better. And so again, it's not just for menopause, it's for everything. And so when patients come to talk to me, it's one of the things I can add to my armamentarium when I talk about nutrition and supplements. It's something that I can help them not only with their hair growth, but how they're feeling. And this company specifically also has a postpartum supplement. They also have a men's supplement. We just completed a men's, and this is the postmenopausal one. We have a men's study that we are just completing with them as well, and a really exciting vegan study that is finishing up, and the results were phenomenal in that one. People were so excited, and the study itself, the product itself, was vegan. You didn't have to be vegan to be in it, but everyone that was coming in at each visit was saying, oh my gosh, my hair looks amazing. So really exciting stuff. The other supplement that we've done research with is the deep sea fish protein. We did the initial studies on that. Again, this is a aminomark C complex. It is a proprietary blend, but it is based on deep sea fish protein. And we had good results with that as well, with a 57% of patients having an increase in hair density after the 3 months, and 80% had an increase in hair density after 6 months with an increase in diameter as well. And just some more pictures to show you at the 0, 3, and 6 months. And then we did a men's study. Again, I think that some men don't care if they're losing their hair, some men do, and so the idea is to have different options that we can to treat that, especially for people that want to just be healthier and want to look better. I list this here just as a list of different ingredients that I like to look for in general when I'm looking at supplements for hair, for improving the hair, improving the nails, improving the skin as well. And this is just a list of them. And again, you'll have copies of this, so you don't have to quickly write it down, or if you want to take pictures, you certainly can. But these are the ingredients that I like to look for if I'm going to supplement things in patients that have hair loss or hair thinning or have an androgenic alopecia or any kind of hair loss. So I treat patients with cicatricial alopecias and lichen planopilaris, and almost all of my patients, when they come in for a hair consult, will go home typically getting a nutrition sheet. Typically, they'll want to go on some kind of supplementation as well as topicals, and then we have a whole armamentarium of other things that we can do. I want to mention biotin here. Years ago, when I started out, 27 years ago, when I finished my residency, I remember going during my residency to the AAD and hearing a great talk on biotin. So all my patients got biotin and zinc. That was all I knew about. That was what they got. And I think the thing is that it's not necessarily that biotin isn't a good supplement. The issue becomes, are you getting too much of it? So a lot of the diet stuff that I talked about, a lot of the nutrition I mentioned, contains biotin in it, and you just have to be careful. Remember that biotin can affect your immunoassays and different kind of blood testing, so make sure if you have someone that is taking biotin, be aware of how much they're taking, be aware of what they have in their diet. Are they getting enough biotin in their diet? And then have them stop that. I usually have them stop it for a month prior to getting any blood tests done to make sure that it doesn't affect the blood tests that are involved. I get this question a lot. Collagen, should we use it? Hyper hip. I think that now, and Dr. Ferris did a great talk yesterday, I think that now we are seeing that the data is there, that companies are providing us products that really do work, that really have a good version that can actually stimulate a collagen in your body, stimulate your body to create and do more than just create more collagen, but also act as an antioxidant, chelate your metals, things like that. So I think that collagen is something nice. Obviously, in a perfect world, you're getting enough of that in everything you're eating. One thing also to mention is I eat sauerkraut with every meal. It's one of the best probiotics that you can get, and it doesn't cost that much. So I have a nice version of it that I get from Lazy Acres, and I eat that every day with every meal. So again, in summary, I just want to talk, please, if you haven't heard enough, talk about nutrition, look into it, read the articles. There's a lot of data out there now showing how nutrition makes a difference. So talk about it with your family, talk about it with your patients, look at what your diet is missing, and then you can add to that. And again, a lot of people, 30% of adults and 12% of kids, they're really looking for complementary or alternative medicine or alternative therapy, so they don't have to do prescriptions. And so I think if we can address this issue, we can address many other, not just hair, not just skin, not just nails, but many other health issues that people are suffering from, that we can make a difference this way. So that's it. We did a little dermatology clinics on hair, so that's always a good reference. And I thank you for your time. We are going to move on now. Dr. Hilary Baldwin, I heard her speak, and she did a great talk on pre, post, and postbiotics. So, all right.
Okay, well, it's a pleasure to be here to talk about whether or not we can recalibrate the skin microbiome. If so, how do we do it? Do we have any idea what we're doing? Unfortunately, my answer is going to be no. There's a lot of data, but we're not there yet. But we're moving ahead quite rapidly, and I think the future is extremely bright. So these are my disclosures for today's presentation. Now, I'm starting off with this very, very basic slide, and everybody's sort of groaning. She's going all the way back to 101. We know this. My point here is that 10 years ago, this slide would have looked completely different. 10 years ago, the microbiome layer would not have been there. We would have stopped at the stratum corneum. And we thought, yeah, there's bacteria on the surface of the skin, but it has nothing to do with the functioning of the skin. And how wrong, of course, were we, that the microbiome is a part of the skin functioning layers, and that it contributes to normal barrier function of the skin. It's a mutualistic relationship where the skin is providing essential nutrients and moisture and a place to live, and the bacteria are providing homeostasis. They are occupying a niche and using up the nutrients that might otherwise be used by pathogens. It decreases the pH of the skin, which we know is what the stratum corneum likes, and it decreases biofilm formation from Staph aureus and Staph epidermidis, which you know allows them to hide from antibiotics and from the immune system. And they also produce a lot of the agents that help us to give host defense and innate immunity through the skin. Bacteriocins, antimicrobial peptides, for example. So when all of this works well, we have a very, very healthy microbiome and healthy skin. But when the skin barrier functions poorly as a result, we end up with numerous different kinds of infections and diseases, and probably as well skin aging. Isn't she beautiful? I love that picture. I want to go up and just hug her. And skin aging is probably affected by our skin microbiome and the barrier function of our skin as well, which is why we're so interested in pro, pre, and postbiotics. The problem is we don't know what normal is. So these columns represent 4 different patients in 4 different areas. And you can see, for example, looking at the antecubital fossa, that whatever that green stuff is, that's very common in the antecubital fossa. But look at the rest of the organism. So the dominant bacteria is often the same, but the rest of the bacteria that live in the area are often very different. And look, for example, on the back, very, very different between patients 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you were going to go and fix the microbiome on the back, what the heck would you use? I mean, you don't know which organism to pick, right? So what has this taught us? That the healthy microbiome is not specifically definable, that there's no recipe, and it is whatever it is in a particular location, on a particular person, and at a particular time. So if we want to go about caring and feeding for the microbiome, how are we going to do this? What are we going to use? We have a menu that we can pick from in general. We can use a probiotic, which is, again, live microorganisms. We could use prebiotics that help to feed the bacteria that we want to support. And we could also use a postbiotic. And postbiotic is basically, as Doris mentioned, it's basically the bacteria and all the soup that lives around it and all of its gene products, minus the bacteria itself. So perhaps a little bit safer, for example, than using a probiotic. So the potential benefits are, again, that it's occupying a niche, it's producing these bacteriocins, it's also been shown to reduce age-induced alkalization of the epidermis for aging, and to bolster antioxidants. Very nice option for anti-aging cream, and it helps to retain moisture. So a lot of hope there, a lot of promise, a lot of good stuff for the future. So this concept sounds really good, but what's the reality, and where are we now? So most of probiotics that are used at the present moment most of the data is for oral supplements. We have very little data for topical probiotics. It's difficult to ensure, of course, the functionality of these bacteria on the surface of the skin. Let's take, for example, the face. These bacteria have to enjoy fat, and they have to enjoy being dried out beyond belief. So you can't take a bacterium that lives normally in a very moist neighborhood, like, let's say, the soil, and put it on the skin and expect it to stay there. It might live there for a day or two, but ultimately it's going to disappear because it needs moisture, a lot of moisture like you have in the soil after a rainy day, right? So there's a limited number of microbial types that we can put on the surface of the skin, and it's unlikely that they're going to last if that's not where they started out. Because we know that the resident microflora, which is on the top of this slide, is our core fixed group, and each one of us has a group of bacteria that live on us, whatever it is, And these suckers can replenish after perturbation. So if you do a chemical peel, if you do microdermabrasion, if you wipe it out with antibiotics, it will come back. So it's theoretically your normal, healthy microbiome. And then we have the transient organisms, which are usually because we touch something or we're in a different environment, and they're often pathogens. But fortunately, they're usually just passing through, and they get taken care of. We wash our skin, we use some Purell, or perhaps they're taken care of by the commensal organisms of the skin. So what is the data for these topical probiotics? Well, this is a list of all of the studies that have been done on various and sundry diseases as well as anti-aging, utilizing topical probiotics. Atopic dermatitis by far is ahead of the game. What is lagging is probiotics in cosmetic skincare. The use for anti-aging is really just in its infancy, but that hasn't stopped everybody from coming out with it. New products are launched at a dizzying speed. When you do Google searches, you find out all sorts of incredible numbers of new products coming out and how much money we're spending on them. But the bottom line is that these claims are largely unsupported. And even though they have a sound scientific rationale behind them, as we just saw, some people suggest, you know what, just stop bathing. Washing is the enemy. And this was brought forth in the hygiene hypothesis way back in 1989, which showed that the lack of exposure to pathogens, especially early in life due to over-cleaning, especially the use of antimicrobials, limits natural immunity development and predisposes to all sorts of things, including atopic dermatitis. So one company that promotes the non-washing concept and basically grabbing a handful of soil, maybe it's been purified a little bit, but mushing it around on your face. I love the statement. Decades of bacteria-killing bloodlust, that meant you washed yourself, have decimated the microorganisms on our skin that consume irritants and toxins in sweat. Not sure what any of that means. I do agree that we tend to be a little bit too clean and we're washing off our natural microbiome, but I think this is going just a step too far. So if we choose to do so, how do we pick which organism to use? As you can see in this cartoon, this particular person, as he ages from being a child to an adult and then to elderly, his bacteria has changed on every portion of his body. So we know that these bugs vary by age and location. We don't know what normal is. We don't know what strains are more effective. We don't know what strains are going to live on the skin, what dose, what frequency, and maybe, therefore, we should use them in combination, which is what we do now. A little of this, a little of that, because we really don't know which one is the right one. So let's pick all sorts of them, right? But is that safe? And who's watching out? Who's watching the ship? Nobody, basically. The FDA doesn't have any regulatory definition for probiotics. It currently falls under the cosmetics category. So no agent is responsible for monitoring. FDA doesn't require approval before launch of anything. And claims can be largely unsubstantiated, like the one that you just saw. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality concluded that the available literature is not sufficiently equipped to determine that probiotics are safe. Indeed, a couple of years ago, there was a recall of one of them due to a potential contamination with a pathogenic bacterium. And we might think, well, you know, that happens a lot with food, it happens a lot with drugs, so this is a one-off, right? Well, maybe it isn't, because if you think about what we're doing with probiotics, the microbe has to be alive in the product, which means you can't put a whole lot of preservatives in there, because then you're going to kill the microbe that you want. Therefore, the other side of the coin is that the final product is clearly not sterile, and unwanted microbial growth is possible and actually quite likely. So we're really not sure if we're seeing microbial overgrowth in some of these products, perhaps a bacterium that you don't want. Now, what about bacteriophages? I find this very interesting. As you know, this is a virus, and it binds to receptors on the bacterial cell surface, and then it has a tail that basically punches a hole in the bacterium and injects the viral genetic material into the bacterium. And then it completely takes over all of the machinery of the cell. So whatever the bacterium was using to make his or her, does it have a gender? His or her own activities, now the virus has commandeered it to make itself, and the cell then lyses and releases hundreds of new progeny. This is very intriguing because the cells can infect all sorts of bacterial cells without negatively affecting human cells. And then we also probably wouldn't have to worry about antibiotic resistance. We could kill bacteria without using antibiotics. So it's very intriguing. And this lysis is accomplished from the inside from soluble lytic enzymes called endolysins. And they lyse the bacterial cells from within. But what if you could pick an endolysin and put it on the outside? Could you lyse the cell from without with an endolysin? Well, there actually is a study looking at this. With this endolysin preparation, we're looking here at selectively killing just Staph aureus, both methicillin resistant and sensitive, in blue, while preserving Staph epidermidis at the same time. And we also see the lack of a development of resistant organisms here. The red line represents methicillin-resistant and sensitive strains from becoming resistant to mupirocin, where the blue line represents the endolysin. So it may be able to kill the bacteria we want to kill without killing the good guys, leaving them behind. So what do we do when we create dysbiosis, which you and I do every single day? We use topical and oral antibiotics, wiping out the microbiome. We use topical retinoids, oral retinoids. We resurface people. We are destroying the microbiome on a regular basis. And maybe the destruction of these commensals could cause more harm than good. Or we may be taking one step forward, but 2 steps back every time we do something like that. Doris mentioned this study already, so I'm not going to belabor it. But this study looked at the concept that C. acnes has several different phylotypes. And as she mentioned, there's the good guys, the subspecies acnes, the bad guy subspecies acnes, which is thought to be associated with acne, and the good guy defendans, which is associated with healthy skin. So the question is, could we take just type 2 as a probiotic and outcompete type 1 and outcompete other organisms that are helping to mitigate inflammation? And you already saw these pictures. So the sample was taken. They specifically isolated defendants and then, very ingeniously, made it so that the bacterial cells couldn't multiply. They could do their job, they could do their metabolism, they could do what they're supposed to do, but they couldn't multiply. Why is that important? You're going to smear a bunch of bacteria on your skin and not know if it could proliferate or if it could migrate, like to my fake knee, right? I don't want to use that. So 121 women were studied, and as you saw the outcome before, with an improved barrier function and improvement in the appearance of their skin. So what if we made a combination? What if we took a swab from your skin, and then we isolated only the good C. acnes, the defendants one, right? And then we did the same thing for the bacteriophages, but we've picked only the bacteriophages that kill the bad C. acnes. So we're increasing the good stuff, we're killing off the bad stuff, or maybe we could use a topical endolysin and put it all together in a cream, apply it to the skin, and improve acne, improve anti-aging. This is not science fiction. This is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. We're just not quite there yet. We're just getting started, but the future is extremely bright. Thank you very much for your attention.
As usual. Do you need help? You okay?
I'm good. I just have to do it slowly.
Okay. Okay, we're going to keep moving on here. Dr. Terrence Keeney's coming up from DC, but you trained here, right?
Yes.
Okay, and a lacrosse player, so let's hear what he has to say about regulations.
Great. Thank you for having me. It's great to be back to sunny Miami. I'm going to be talking about the U.S. FDA regulatory scrutiny of regenerative medicine products and specifically PRP. As a full disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't major in public policy. I am from the swamp. You know, I'm from the epicenter of the regulatory industry. I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. No, I actually just stayed here. You know, why am I talking about this? Well, actually, the reason I got very interested in this topic is around 2020, 2021, all of a sudden, I got a notification from Google that I could no longer do Google AdWords for my website. Out of the blue, we were a frequent user, had no idea why. After a week, calling them what's going on, we were told because we had PRP on our website that I can no longer run Google Ads. I'm like, why is that happening? And I'm not going to give away the punchline, but I'll be talking about why that did happen. But when looking at who regulates regenerative medicine products and PRP, it's done at the FDA, at the Center of Biologics Evaluation and Research, and so they are responsible for regulating human cells, tissues, cellular, and tissue-based products. Now, there's always been this ambiguity within that industry about, regenerative products coming from oneself, because there is this new drug development exemption. So usually when we bring a new drug, you need an IND, investigational new drug application, and you go down the traditional regulatory pathway. But within, cell-based therapeutics, you have this exemption where you can avoid that traditional regulatory pathway, which is years and billions of dollars, if you do not manipulate those tissue-based cultures that much. But it's been very ambiguous about how much manipulation, what point when you start messing with these self-tissue products do you have to go down that regulatory pathway? And so this is where this kind of ambiguity arose. And there's a lot of bad actors in the US who have taken advantage of it. A lot of podcast listeners here. Does anyone listen to podcasts? I got really into it. My wife hates me every time I'm like, I was actually listening to this podcast. And she's like, enough about the podcast. But there's an excellent podcast called Bad Batch that talks about this in the regenerative medicine industry, how there's a lot of bad actors who have taken advantage of kind of desperate patients, kind of touting kind of miracle cures using kind of regenerative medicine or cell-based tissue products. And as a result, there's so much negative publicity that the federal government, which is often a slow, reactive, very deliberate organization body, started really looking at the regenerative medicine industry. And they first came out with a big warning in 2019. This was an FDA warning letter that said there are currently no FDA-approved exosome products. This was first the exosome warning. They said that there are certain clinics that are deceiving about what exosomes can accomplish. So that was first a warning. But because of that kind of ambiguity, they decided to kind of further clarify their position on the use of homologous versus autologous, so cell-based tissues from oneself versus cell-based tissues from other. And this was a new guidance that was published in July of 2020. This is the link right here. So they were further kind of dialing and trying to remove some of the ambiguity that a lot of these regenerative medicine clinics who were doing unsavory things were kind of taking advantage of. And they, not only did they come out with this warning, they went kind of consumer-facing, and now consumers can kind of report to physicians and clinics that are not necessarily behaving appropriately, particularly focusing on stem cells and exosomes. Now, if you look at that new guidance, really what were they focusing on? Once again, that's stem cells and exosomes. So these are what we call homologous products. So these are cell or tissue-based products from not oneself, right? So these are stem cells from elsewhere, those stem cells from oneself, but like traditionally of these kind of homologous uses, including exosomes. But what products were not affected by this new guidance? So these are autologous whole blood products from oneself that were minimally manipulated, so that just mechanical and physical separation. So these were the kind of things we think about that were not kind of changed by this new guidance were PRP, fat grafting, bone marrow aspirates. So that's the kind of the clarification. So in that kind of guidance, they do require that all stem cell products require FDA approval. And now there's a list. I just looked at the most updated list. There's around 16 FDA-approved stem cell therapies, often for blood cancers and kind of more hematologic disorders. And there's no currently FDA-approved exosome product. And they did clarify the exosome regulatory pathway is the traditional phase 1 through phase 3 regulatory pathway. As of May 2020, there's over 100, and I believe 80 exosome products going down that regulatory pathway. What's interesting about the FDA, and this gets confusing, the FDA is a pure regulatory body. They come out with these kind of proclamations and say that we should, everyone should follow it, but there's no enforcement arm of the FDA. There's no FDA police. The police of the FDA, which is really the federal government, is the Department of Justice. And it's very rare that the FDA, these two regulatory bodies kind of work together. But the DOJ, because there were so many bad actors and they were worried about, the safety of people and patients that the DOJ, which is the enforcement arm of the federal government, started looking into people who are breaking these new guidance on regenerative medicine products, which is very unusual. And they gave a date, June 1st, where the DOJ is really going to start looking at bad actors. So they gave like a year from that guidance to when the DOJ was going to start enforcing it. Basically saying, all you shady clinics, get your house in order, start kind of following the rules, only offer kind of FDA-approved products or things that we can use. And what happened was, right around that time, there was panic and confusion about PRP users, because right about this time when you're hearing about like DOJ coming in, all of a sudden I couldn't use Google AdWords. And as someone who doesn't use stem cell products in my practice, there is really confusion of, is PRP being lumped together? Because often those clinics that were offering stem cells and umbilical cord and really these kind of unscientifically proven therapies were also doing PRP. And the problem is you had the Department of Justice, which is just lawyers and enforcement people kind of being told that they should go after these clinics, and they're kind of just looking at kind of list of therapies that these people do, and PRP was getting kind of lumped in. And as dermatologists, aesthetic providers, often we can get very concerned and alarmed if we don't want the DOJ knocking on my door. At least I don't. Does anyone want to deal with the Department of Justice? I don't. And I have a lot of DOJ patients of mine, so I'm always very careful, and I've talked to a lot of them about this. But there is this panic and confusion about PRP users. Are we allowed to continue to do this? Why is Google telling us that I can't do Google AdWords, even though I'm not doing, using stem cells or claiming that I'll cure COVID with, this magic injection? And so to be clear on the FDA's stance on PRP, PRP preparation systems are a 510K Class 2 medical device. So their FDA approval or their indication is that they're able to separate blood products and concentrate platelets. The original indication was that these products, PRP, should be mixed with bone graft materials to enhance bone graft handling procedures in an orthopedic operative procedure. So that's kind of the indication, so to speak, when you think about a drug. So anything we do in aesthetics or with hair loss or rejuvenation is off-label. Now, we are able to practice medicine using therapies off-label. So we're within right to use PRP, but that is the stance. So anything we do in aesthetics and hair is considered an off-label application of PRP. And that clarification that in June 2020, they once again said that as long as you do not excessively manipulate or add anything to it, PRP is exempt from that that FDA regulatory pathway. Now, the question a lot of people ask is, there are a lot of providers who will take PRP, which is minimally manipulated, concentrate the platelets, and then add their own special sauce. I think a lot of people do that to kind of differentiate themselves from the competitors in the market. The question is, once you start messing with that blood product that you've minimally manipulated, are you now manipulating it, making it a high-risk blood product, which is treated like a drug? So there is this kind of low-risk, minimal manipulation versus heavily manipulated, which has to go down the new drug pathway, which includes potentially activated PRP. That new guidance did not state whether adding anything to your PRP before you inject it is manipulating it. So an activated PRP, if you don't know, is sometimes you'll add something to the vial prior to injection to cause those platelets to degranulate, because really the secret sauce, or thought to be secret sauce, of PRP is the growth factors found within the platelets. So the idea is if you cause it to degranulate prior to injection, you have all those active growth factors ready to kind of bind. Now, there is data that suggests that when we inject unactivated PRP, that's just your concentrated platelets, when you inject, there is kind of mechanical activation. So when those platelets are going through that small needle, they bump into each other, causes degranulation, but also that needle creates a small injury to the skin, which releases endogenous thrombin, which can activate the platelets. So there's a debate, even in the literature, is activated versus unactivated platelets even necessary? But from my perspective, if you start activating it, then you're getting in this kind of legal gray area are we allowed to? But the FDA did not clarify if activated PRP is allowed. They just left it ambiguous, and FDA is very vague at providing kind of further clarification. We were involved with one of our dermatology societies to try to get clarification, and they're very kind of hesitant to kind of defy definitive things. Their documents are their documents, and they say read that, and that's our stance. So, PRP is not affected by that new guidance, but once again, my question was, when all this happened, is why can't I run Google AdWords on my practice? And is a Department of Justice official who's confused about, like, what is bad, what is not bad, thinking stem cells, PRP, they're all the same thing. There's a PRP guy here in DC right next door. I can just pop in and raid his office. So, I was kind of concerned. But really what's changed and what I had further clarification is the FDA does not regulate the practice of medicine, but in theory, when we're doing consumer or patient-facing advertising, which includes our website, our Instagram, when we are trying to communicate to patients, technically, we're not supposed to be making off-label claims as used as a marketing tool to bring patients in. We're allowed to practice medicine when that patient-physician encounter. We're able to practice medicine, which includes using off-label procedures and drugs, but to market and advertise the use of off-label things is slightly frowned upon. Now, it's never been kind of enforced. So this is where it's confusing. The DOJ was encouraged by the federal government to start enforcing, or going after these bad actors. So what we've learned is you have to be careful of how you kind of advertise or position PRP in your patient-facing or your consumer-facing materials. So, for example, on your website, you can say you use PRP. PRP is part of your therapeutic armamentarium. You can tell about what PRP system you use, what PRP is, you can describe it, but you should avoid drug claims such as, I use PRP to grow hair, I use PRP to get rid of wrinkles. Those are very specific drug claims that can kind of put you in gray area, especially it could draw attention to you, but also it runs into trouble for advertising of Google if that's something you're interested in. So that is something that I've kind of avoided. The use of PRP or promoting PRP in your Instagram is something that on a case-by-case basis, me personally, I took all my before and afters of PRP on my Instagram off of it, because when I'm showing a before and after of here's hair, no hair, here's great hair, that is a drug claim. Look, my PRP has grown hair. I'm not sure. I think that the DOJ has been a little bit more careful, but in theory, that is technically not kosher, so to speak. So use appropriate language. Don't make drug claims when using PRP. And then lastly, the question is why and how are there still exosome products being sold to market? That's a big question. So, any exosome product, if you look at them, they will all say that these are not drugs. That's a big kind of caveat. They'll say these are cosmetic products in itself. So these are actual disclaimers that I saw on leading exosome makers. It's post-care topical use cosmetic solutions, and actually the direct quote, these products are not drug products. They're not intended to prevent, treat, or cure disease or medical conditions. They're not intended to be injected or delivered intravenously. Yet often when you see these products are being kind of recommended in addition to certain procedures, once again, my point of view is, exosome industry is extremely interesting. The use of extracellular vesicles to treat disease, I think there's a lot of great science behind it. But from a regulatory standpoint, they're required to go down the FDA pathway. And if we're using these to treat disease, to treat things, then you might be in kind of a legal gray area. Okay. So that concludes my talk. Thank you so much.
Okay, speaking of exosomes, Dr. Gold's going to give us his take. And everyone go and take down all the stuff off your Instagram.
I'm taking off my website. All right. Raise your hand if you put your PRP photos on your Instagram, because mine are coming off tomorrow.
For that DOJ.
So I really wanted to call this a different talk because I told Glennis I was going to call it. So I actually call this talks Exosomes and Exo Something. All right, and you'll understand that in a few minutes. So as a disclaimer, I work for some of these companies that are part of it. So again, I think we talked about Google. What's trending on Google? Exosomes is one of the biggest things that out there that are trending on Google. This is a great article if you want to read it. And if you didn't hear Glennis's talk on Thursday, that was a great talk. And so she's one of the world's experts. I am not one of the world's experts, but I love this concept and I love this thing. So they're extracellular vesicles, as you heard. They induce communication between cells, and there are numerous preclinical and clinical trials to show that they do things. So actually, in preparation for this meeting, we actually Googled over 150 companies that claim to have exosomes. There are a lot of companies involved in exosome research, and there's a lot of medical diseases that they are showing to have promise in, as Terrence said, that are going down an IND pathway. We live in that other world where there's nothing, and so we have to be careful. So they are beginning to get attention within investigative dermatology, and they're integrated into functional cosmeceuticals as well as cell-free regenerative medicine. All right, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on what they are, because we've covered that before. But again, they're extracellular vesicles. They contain nucleic acid, whether it's DNA, mRNA, miRNA. And these vesicles are different sizes, and the exosomes are actually the smaller of these communicating cells, and that's important. They've been isolated from all body fluids, including blood, urine, saliva, breast milk, and are constitutively secreted. And so they are everywhere in our world, and they play essential roles in all these pathological, physiological conditions by manipulating the cellular communication between cells and eventually altering gene expression. So there is a role for this without anything. And again, I'm going to skip a couple things. There's lots of things in our literature about what they are, how they work, and you can go read that. And again, emerging cell-free based therapeutics in dermatologic diseases. So they're also being used a lot in dermatologic diseases. So again, and we'll come back to this study in a minute. So look at the diseases: atopic dermatitis, skin barrier, skin regeneration. Again, published studies that exist. And again, Karen showed this slide, and I'm thrilled he did. And again, I got interested in this, and I don't know if you were at the meeting in Las Vegas, but I went out to dinner with a company, and I couldn't fathom the conversation I was having with people that have no real medical background, telling me how they were injecting exosomes into every part of your body to do something. And there was a group of like 3 or 4 dermatologists there, and we were sort of taken aback and going, okay, we know this is new, we know this is different, but you're going to get yourself in so much trouble if something goes wrong. And again, the FDA regulates this stuff. You cannot inject these products, period. And if you do, you are setting yourself up for a really bad time, not only with your malpractice carriers. If something goes wrong, they will not cover you, and the FDA will eventually find you, and you're going to get in a lot of trouble. So that is the key takeaway that I wanted to share with everybody on exosomes. You have to use it topically. Now, I was just at a meeting in Paris about 10 days ago, or 2 weeks ago, and the person in front of my talk on exosomes injects minoxidil, spironolactone, dutasteride, and exosomes to grow hair. If his before and after pictures were accurate, it's the best thing since white bread, all right? And I had to go after him and tell him we can't do that. It's just not in the cards for anything that we do. So again, there are a lot of companies, and what you have to understand, and what I have come to understand why I say exosomes and exo something, exosomes are cell-derived, human-derived. Plant-based exosomes have nothing to do with exosomes. There is no such thing as a plant-derived exosome. They're stem cells or growth factors. They're not even stem cells. They're growth factors. Terrence, nod if I'm telling it correctly. Okay. They are just growth factors that are taken out from the plant, put into something, and then we put it on the skin. Not to say they don't work, because I'm going to show you they do. But if you want a true exosome-based product, and this is that slide. Human-based exosomes are real exosomes. Plant-based are not real exosomes. All right, let's go through some of the companies real quick. This is the first and only derived platelet. I won't mention names. You can read the names. The first and only derived platelet-derived exosome. All the work comes from the Mayo Clinic. They call it regenosomes. It is a patented process to manufacture scales and regenerative exosomes that they call regenosomes. Again, it goes through an amazingly detailed process from A to B to get us what we need. They all come from platelets, and it's a skincare product. And I think they're here, actually. And one of the things that they did, this is at the end, you see Soraya Wells has leading the dermatologic charge. She's a wonderful dermatologist up at Mayo Clinic, and they've done their work. And the other companies haven't done their work yet. Now, some of it is ongoing now, but they have done their work. And again, we see 6 weeks after treatment, the incredible improvement in the skin. As a topical, if you will, cosmeceutical that are derived from exosomes or human-based platelets. So they've done what they need to do. It's published in a couple different ways now. They've done all the imaging and all this stuff, and they are a legit company, a legit skincare company, not claiming to take this stuff and inject it anywhere and do what you want. So you get some really nice results, and you can see this kind of thing here. Again, these products work by healing the skin. And so, again, this is something that is very nice and very important. So I wanted to share that with you. And this clicker is not moving back there. All right, this is another company. I spend a lot of time with this company. This is the one that they were injecting in Europe, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But we can't do it, and they have different varieties. And again, if you look at what they say, what I have underlined, these are post-care topical use cosmetic solutions that have been accepted by the POCPC, which is this cosmetics group, and the International Cosmetic Ingredient Nomenclature Committee. These products are not drug products. They are not intended to prevent, treat, or cure any medical condition. They are not intended to be injected, just like Taryn said. That is the key thing here. And again, they go through, and you heard this from Glynis the other day, the processes to get these human-derived exosomes is very detailed, very specific. And again, this is where we see their benefits after procedures. And so again, there are some outside the U.S. information on this, but I think if you look at what it does, this is some ulcers, skin ulcers, bad skin, healing. This is where it can play a nice, useful role for our patients to go from this to this. Again, but we have other things as well that we can use this for. But the play for exosomes is getting so big, and we are seeing this kind of data. What I need to see, and as a caveat, I edit 2 journals in dermatology, and so if it's not peer-reviewed, I'm not ready to sort of just carte blanche say this is going to work. So if you want to try it, you will get these kind of results. I just have to start seeing the literature get filled with this. But post-procedure, so this is, all right, this is up Terrence alley, post-PRP and exosomes, right? But it's topically applied exosomes. I think this is a microneedling procedure. The healing happens faster. Another patient here with erbium laser. And there's no question they work for hair. And again, I think that's one of the nice indications to start rubbing it on your scalp and putting it on your scalp. I think your patients are going to see a big difference. Another company, again, lots of different things going with it. Also starting, and that first company is actually looking at a couple clinical studies here in the US, so that's really nice. This company also starting to look at studies. And again, we have these, they're from mesenchymal cells. And again, what is it used for? It's used for skin rejuvenation, it's used for hair rejuvenation, but you can't inject this stuff. Another company here, this is plant-based, all right? So to me, this is growth factors. And again, there's a variety, and you see in red there, plant stem cells. And they're not even stem cells, they're growth factors. And again, there's a lot of them that come out of this, and there's a lot of technology. Yes, it's clean and pure, big deal. They all have to be clean and pure to get what they need. And again, where the inflammation comes from, anything that gives us inflammation, we can show, and they have shown, that we can reduce that inflammation with growth factors. Well, I've been a dermatologist for 30 years, and certain skincare products that you have in your office, I helped develop with some companies, and we've known that we can reduce inflammation with growth factors for 30 years. So it's not new, but this is the buzz, so this is what we're hearing about. You also can get collagen and elastic expression, and that's important. Again, they've shown all this. But again, when you look at somebody here after energy-based treatments, which one would you rather have on your, would your face after your treatment? So we have the clinical data. Now we have to see it in clinical controlled trials in order to make it real. And that's my point of everything I'm saying. Again, they have hair products too, and that's nice. This is an interesting product that actually has science, okay? So this is a plant-derived exosome. Again, it's plant-derived, but it's in the exosome category. And again, they have been around, and this is from, if you know the term ashwagandha, it's useful for, we know that's a major product in one of the hair supplements. That's probably the best hair supplement that exists in the world. And again, used for hair restoration. But here we go. And I commend and I thank them for at least getting out there and doing the clinical work before they come out with a product. Because I don't even know, is this product out yet? Yes or no? So now it's out. It wasn't when I first started talking. So in 2021, they actually had their first abstracts presented at the ASDS. And again, you can see it, the isolation and how they get it. And how well it functions, the safety of this. This is what we need to see for everything that we have. So I think they've done the right thing. So again, I encourage you to go find this and learn more about it because it's important. So topical exosomes to me are a growing part of the whole thing. Again, I'm sort of on the bias side about human-based and plant-based, but they're all exosomes. So you have to just understand that, but we need the science. And without the science, we need biopsies, we need everything. They are happening now, thanks to people like Glennis and David Goldberg, and I'm doing some of this. We have to have this stuff in our literature. It's not good enough to just throw this stuff on and not know what's going to happen for a long period of time. We have to see the changes histologically, electron microscopy, all that kind of stuff in order for us to feel comfortable, giving it to our patients each and every day. Having said that, there is no question this stuff works, all right? And now it's up to us to prove that it works. So I hope that helped you a little bit.
Okay, so we have a break, but I am going to ask the panel to come up here, and we will take questions. If you need to take your break and you want to go, please feel free to go. But we'll stay up here for a few minutes so we can take some questions. If you don't feel comfortable standing up and asking, you can type it in the little iPad that you have, and we'll take them. If anyone wants to start with any questions,
I'll start first. I actually, when I first gave my first exosome talk, what was it, like a year and a half, 2 years ago? I called Patty.
Yes, someone.
I do okay?
Collagen supplements. Okay.
What's the question?
It's when you're taking collagen supplements, is it better to be plant-based or animal-based? Patty,
I'll answer that. Yeah, I don't think that we know the answer, so they're not compared the two. But basically, the collagen molecule is a collagen molecule. Some people have preferences for botanicals for obvious reasons. Some people don't like bovine. There's religious issues with porcine. Murine, it is for sure the most popular right now, fish collagen. And the plant-based collagens are good too. What makes the collagens all different is how they're hydrolyzed and how they're processed and how they're enzymatically degraded. So I always say each of them sort of has their own unique composition. And as I spoke about the other day, the Verisol version of collagen has been studied more extensively probably than most. It's been looked at in anti-aging studies, been looked at for cellulite. It's actually been looked at for osteoporosis. They did an interesting study this year showing it helped women as evidenced by improvement in their DEXA scans. So there's a lot of data starting to come through on these, but we're still, as everybody's been saying all day, in our infancy with this. But I do recommend collagen supplements to women. I say do the inside-out approach, but do the outside-in approach as well. And yes, we do eat a lot of collagen, but when you're taking 2.5 to 5 grams of this, in a compact way, you're getting more of the dipeptides and tripeptides than you probably get when you eat a piece of chicken, for example.
But I think one of the things that I've been recommending, and I think we need to think about and need more data on, is collagen as a powder in a drinkable form versus collagen as a pill. And I've been recommending more the powders and the drinkable than the pills because they are heavy proteins. And I think you have to be careful in the end because these have to be metabolized, and I think it can be a stress potentially on the kidneys. So I think how much you get, there is an issue, there could be an issue with too much collagen, and the pill can really compact it and be too fast a delivery for the body. So I think looking at powders and drinks over pills is a better way to look for now until we know more.
And I think most of the study doses are about 2.5 to 10. There's studies on all of those.
So do you worry more about someone taking too much and the effect on the body?
I mean, I think if they take the recommended dose, whatever's on the supplement, I think they're fine.
Yeah.
Most of the Verisols are 2.5 to 5.
I typically just try to make sure that I'm getting organic. That's what I try to look for when I'm dealing with it. Less, extra products that are put in there that you don't need. And I do the powder recommendation as well. Next question.
Any data on oral hyaluronic acid? Because now people are taking hyaluronic acid orally.
Anyone do oral hyaluronic acid?
You know, years ago I looked at some studies on that, and I'm sorry they're not fresh enough in my mind to make an intelligent comment to you, but yes, I remember looking at that, and there were some studies. It was very interesting to me. I'm sorry. I'll go back. I've got that PowerPoint up in my room. Find me somewhere.
Any other questions? Alkaline water.
Alkaline water?
It's very
It
popular.
really is. I wish I knew something about it, but I don't. Do you, Doris?
No. I know people who swear by it, but
Yeah, it's all the
my dad
rage.
would say some water is more wet than other waters. I don't know.
Sure. I mean, there shouldn't be, again, I think.
Did you guys hear that? The question was, could we inject the PRP and then put the exosome topically on after a PRP injection session?
I mean, there's no reason you can't do that.
I don't think there's
Again,
added value.
just so you don't inject the exosome part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that where I got tricky, a lot of people like to inject exosome products. I would not inject any exosome product. View as exosome as as of right now, it's a new ingredient in a cosmeceutical product. So just like there are certain products that were developed and the whole premise of the product is post-procedure where they did a clinical study, but it's not a new drug. They didn't get a FDA approval process, right? But I will be careful with exosome. One of the big concerns with FDA is I would ask any company that you're working with, how are they sourcing these products? Because these are extracellular vesicles. So they come from a cell first. And so what's the cell bank that they're providing it? What's the sterility? How are they kind of collecting these? Because that bad batch kind of exosome podcast I mentioned, there were companies that were saying exosomes, they were taking cells, they were just kind of centrifuging, chewing them up, just like lysing cells, and there was a raft of cases of infections and bad product, no sterility standards whatsoever. So you just have to be out. There's a lot of companies, like Michael said, that are coming out. The exosome is a hot industry. You have to just be very careful where they're sourcing their products, especially if you're going to be placing post-procedure where there's opening. So you can, but I would say look at the company you're working with. Yeah.
Yes.
Come find us afterwards, and we'll tell you which ones. I think that's the best thing.
Right now, the ones that are available are typically frozen. They come frozen, and that's what you get. And they have a short, they're only about 6 months duration that you can have them in your freezer. And
It's
then
expensive.
It's very
Very
expensive.
expensive.
Very expensive. But there's some
I'll
new
tell it to
stuff
you
coming.
afterwards.
Yes. Oh, okay. Do you want to have to pull it up? Here, let's see what the question is.
You're good.
Right here. Okay, so I think we lost.
Which probiotic?
Someone asked,
brand?
which probiotic brand do you recommend? We
Hillary's
lost.
not here.
I
Which
know,
one
we
do you
lost
recommend,
her.
Doris?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't.
So this is the Glad skincare.
So for me, though, I do, again, that's where the nutrition for me comes in, and I have patients do as much sauerkraut as they can possibly tolerate.
So you're beefing up
Yeah.
And then in terms of the question on salicylic acid is friendly to the skin
Yeah, Rick.
biome, yet we often favor benzoyl peroxide to decrease antibiotic resistance. Is it best practice to alternate these two products? So what I find is it's the concentration. So if you're using a lower concentration of benzoyl peroxide, it's better. And if you're using it as a cleanser, it's better than as a leave-on product. So if you do a general cleanse, you're really not going to eradicate and annihilate all the bacteria in your skin. So I find that's how I've been switching my benzoyl peroxide is to a cleanser, and I haven't seen any issues with that. Or you can alternate.
I'm going to answer one question that was directed towards one of my slides, and I think it was that last slide I had about the PD-L1 inhibitors. In the study from MD Anderson, they did demonstrate that patients who either had to take antibiotics or were on probiotics had less microbial diversity and had a lower response rate to the PD-L1. So the slide was correct. And I had sort of the same question in my mind when I read it, but that was exactly what the poster said.
After PRP injections, can you put XO? That was the question I read. Do we know what the FDA stance on injectable micronutrient mesotherapy
Michael,
treatment
you
is?
talk-
So mesotherapy, as cocktails of mesotherapy is illegal in the United States.
It's definitely banned in New York.
So do not have somebody compound a bunch of things and then start inject them into the body. It is illegal.
This one says, I work in
Absolutely.
vascular surgery and I see some of the worst wounds. Am I allowed to topically apply exosomes to them at this point? And I
think
do
so.
that all the time.
Absolutely. Bad wounds, I mean, this is what it's
It's the
for,
perfect place
right?
for it.
Topical wound healing. That was actually probably the first indication of some of these human-based exosomes. It was wound healing. I don't get consents for this.
Get
probably a
consents
good
for
idea.
everything.
Consents for everything.
Get consents for
I
everything.
mean, consents for everything.
My hesitation getting consent on exosomes is that's what you do for drugs. There's no FDA approved exosome product according to the FDA. If you're like lifting out risk and benefits of applying exosomes, you're implying that this is a drug and you don't know, like it could be infected. I don't know where this is from. That would be my hesitation. Yeah.
If you ask your malpractice carrier, they'll tell you don't use them.
Yeah.
But we will tell you to use them.
I guess I didn't receive my question. I'm a pediatrician. I'm doing aesthetics as some part of my business. So the thing is, I've been using Procel, for microchanneling. Initially, that product was sold as stem cell bone marrow from stem cell. So, but in reality, I want to know what that is.
Usually it's the conditioned medium that you're getting.
Correct.
That's actually it's what's kind of grown in the little medium. That's the process. So it's not actually stem cells. You're just getting growth factors is what you're getting. No.
No, they're usually stem cell-derived growth factors.
Right. But they're from the medium that.
I mean, it could be.
I think, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Many of the conditioned medium products have exosomes in them. These cells are secreting things. These are just little extracellular vesicles that come out of cells. So there could be exosomes in there. I'm not.
I'm not either.
The
Sorry.
growth factors do work.
Procel.
Is it P cell or A cell? Was it A cell?
Procel.
Yeah, sorry.
But if they're working? Any other questions?
I think the FDA is really going to have to address this because exosomes are such a broad category of products.
So again, back to what I said during my talk, I looked at 150 companies around the world doing exosomes, and when you were talking about systemic diseases, they're all going down an IND pathway.
Right.
So they're all doing it correctly. It's our world that's the wild, wild west. Outside of the one study that I showed from Nutrafol, there is none right now in the U.S. And so we have to have the data.
Yeah, so there's a ton of exosome research going on. I mean, the private equity raise has been huge. They all do IND, they're all going to real diseases, but they're going to real diseases even in dermatology. So if, overseas, if all of a sudden we're realizing these, overseas is kind of the Wild West in certain countries, if injecting certain exosomes are in growing hair, then that company needs to file an IND and bring a new drug to development. We can't just import that and be like, oh, they do it over here and we inject. Just like if some drug gets FDA approved first in Europe and it's not FDA approved here, you do not import drugs and start doing what they do, right? So even if some other company they're getting, then you tell them you have to go to the regulatory pathway. I'm happy to be your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 investigator,
Well, again, as I said when I was at this meeting in Paris, everybody but me was injecting exosomes. And I'm like, I can't do this. If you come to the United States, and the company's based here, it's a Korean company that has a big base here. And they know they can't promote this except for topical application.
And what's interesting is all this regulatory scrutiny came from the exosome industry. It was really that bad. There's a couple really bad players that people got HIV, died, like they're injecting horrible products in. And you should, and so all this scrutiny actually came from the stem cell stuff has always been brewing, but it wasn't until the exosome stuff came that the FDA was like, we got to clamp down on this, FDA and DOJ. So, applying it, view it as a cosmeceutical, it's a topical product. Look at the companies you're working with, but I would never put it in. And I would be, you be careful about putting over huge wounds, and that would be my
yeah. Again, look at the cosmeceuticals that we have on the market that have, thanks to these people, you have all the clinical data, right? Are cosmeceuticals a drug? Absolutely, they change the structure and function of the skin. But they do. But they don't promote them that way, right? And so they're not promoted by the companies that they're changing the structure and function of the skin. We publish papers. There's a 34% reduction in wrinkles. Yeah. They don't use that data when they show us their cosmeceuticals.
They have, but L'Oreal's been fined $300 million one time. L'Oreal's been fined multiple times. So they're very careful of the drug claims. Yeah.
Okay, I'm being told to wrap it up because I think they want to get you in to see the displays and all that good stuff.